My name is Jim Kleverweis, and I'm a non-writing executive producer.
And your profile on IMDb says that you started in the DGA directors program.
Actually, I started as a production assistant in 1991. I was a production assistant I started on A League of Their Own, and I did League and 4 other movies as a PA. I applied to the DGA's assistant director training program, both in New York and LA. I was accepted in LA. And so I joined that in 92 and graduated in 94 and then became an AD.
And how long were you an AD before you made the move?
I was an AD from, let's see, 94 through 2001. So 7 years. Then I became a production manager. So which is a DGA covered position. From let's say 2001 up until 2010. And then in 2011, I produced my first pilot solo. So I first produced by credit and then just stayed producing there until 2018. And then I was elevated to non-writing EP on a show called Euphoria. And I've stayed that now at HBO since I've been with them.
So when you have a show that you're a producer or an EP of, does someone approach you with a script already in hand and ask you to be the executive producer, or do you partner earlier than that?
So far, I mean, I am doing some development on my own, but we haven't gone to camera on anything yet, so we'll leave that out of the equation. But basically, I'm a hired gun. So by the time I'm brought on, the script has been purchased. The pilot of the series has been greenlit. They are looking for somebody to come in and partner with a showrunner to help them. I actually help them tell their story. And so that's when I'm brought onto the project.
So you're bringing not only your experience, but just the credibility that comes with having, your peace of mind for the studio, I guess, having someone with your experience.
I'm a bit of a security blanket. But I'm not, I am still freelance, even though I'm under contract. I'm not a studio employee. So, there are executives in charge of production. I'm not that. I'm technically a freelance producer. So when they bring me in, it's, I'm usually matched with the right showrunner. I'll meet several people sometimes. And I'm brought in to help them balance their creative needs with studio politics and studio realities, as well as budget, as well as schedule. I also handle cast and talent relations and all that stuff. So, I touch a lot of different fields.
And I assume that since you've stuck with that and have, been doing all the other jobs leading up to it, that you must enjoy being an EP.
I do. It's a bit of a weird job in that it floats from show to show and it's not always the same. And it's always a lot of politics that you're balancing. I always tell my team, I've mentored a lot of people into being producers, and I always tell them that, like, as you move up, your checklists get smaller and smaller. It used to be that you knew exactly what your day would be because you have to do this many tasks. And by the time you move up to being an EP, it's like, no, it's about phone calls you have to remember to return. And beyond that, it comes at you and you're very like broad picture, worldview oriented instead of having specific things that you have to accomplish in a day.
Interesting. Yeah, we've not talked to an EP before in these interviews we've done. So, we've talked to producers, but line producers, but
right.
Yours is different and of interest.
Yeah, and I was a line producer, so I've been through that for a long time. That's quite a job as well. And so I work with a line producer. They work with me, and we do this in tandem. But they're much more detail oriented than I am on the whole thing. I tend to be bigger picture.
And you mentioned, I'm jumping through these probably.
Sure, go ahead.
You mentioned that you like to mentor people, up and coming producers. Did you have a mentor that helped you along the way?
I've been lucky. I've had several that have helped me along the way. I had a couple of mentors who helped me as an AD, coming up through the ranks. And then really one mentor who kind of taught me how to be a producer. And, I started with him as a second AD many years ago, and then he hired me as a first and a production manager, and then helped me move into producing. So he's still a very important person in my life.
And how do you choose the people that you would like to mentor? Do you see something in them that kind of sparks it?
Yeah, it's not for everybody. And even though people will tell you they want to be a producer, my first thing to always say back to them, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to you? I want to hear what you think a producer is. And a lot of times it's, well, I want to develop this. I want to do this. I want to do that. And they don't want to deal with the nuts and bolts side. And that's what I deal with everything. So if I'm going to mentor somebody, I want to mentor them to do what I do. And not everybody fits into that category because most people don't want to do this. So it does take a little selective questioning and figuring out whether or not that there's some, that they have the right attitude and the wherewithal for it.
What kind of person is that? I mean, in terms of personality and in terms of aptitude?
In terms of personality, it's somebody who is, I know this is going to sound like a broad generality, but it's really fair and balanced, and somebody who really always, strives to do the right thing, whether that's going to be painful or not, or sometimes even personally challenging rather than not. You have to look at the greater good of the show. And if they have that attitude to begin with, then you're halfway there. In terms of skill set, I really believe strongly that foundational knowledge is the key to all of this. So I like people who are, former PAs who've been ADs, production managers and such, or have been office PAs who've become production coordinators and supervisors, and then really taken the reins to try to move beyond that. Because I do think there's two tracks, and we're leaving out a very capable group of people if we stick with just the DGA. And it's something that actually Warner Brothers listened to me on, and we just did our first training plan week with about 8 women from New York who are all coordinator, supervisor level, and we're training them to be line producers. Because a lot of people don't want to hire a line producer who's not a UPM. And that a lot of these days, and I know from my own experience, I will have a UPM credit on a show, and I'll have a supervisor doing a lot more work than that. And I want to make sure that those people get their shot because they are really talented.
That's great. How important is the ability to compromise in your job?
Like air or blood. Like you have to, you're never going to win. And you have to, the other part is you can't have an ego about it, right? Like I don't care if my ideas are taken or not. What I do care about is that we achieve a result. And so like when we have script issues or things like that, I will go to a showrunner or director or both, depending on how it is, and say like, look, here are our challenges. Here's a few suggestions. And if they take none of them, great. But as long as they come up with something else that gets us there, I'm fine with that, So compromise is key. I mean, but the other side of the coin is you have to know when not to compromise. And I always look at it this way, that what a line producer does, and to a degree I'm responsible for, is that we are custodians of someone else's money. It's not my cash. It's Warner Discovery, it's Sony, it's Disney, whoever it is. And so when they tell you this is what you got, you can't compromise on that. Like that is the edict. And so when you're with your teams, whether it's department heads and, lighting is wanting this, or it's, a showrunner wanting that, there's a line that you have to draw and say, we can't really do that, but here's the threshold and what can we do within that space. It's a business, whether we like it or not. It's a creative business.
And I assume that involves a lot of diplomacy as a person.
Yeah. I often get asked by college students, like, what did I study in college that prepared me to be a producer? And I tell them absolutely nothing that I learned in a class. However, I was an RA and a hall director overseeing 8 RAs my last few years of university. And that prepared me to be a producer because you're taught conflict resolution, you're taught empathy, patience. all that stuff that you need to do this job. I think RAs make great producers.
That's great. I've never heard it
Yeah.
put like that before, but
it's so true.
It is the truth.
So
Yeah.
true.
It's the truth. Yeah.
I'm also a fan of Boy Scouts. Or
Yes, Boy Scouts, another good one. Yeah.
If they tell me they're an Eagle Scout, I am all right. Let's talk.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another good one.
So, can you tell us a little bit about the show you're working on right now, the franchise?
Well, sure. We've just aired our last episode a couple weeks ago. We're in the middle of waiting to see if we're coming back to do another one. The franchise is an interesting show. It's a show about making a movie. So we are portraying the crew of a large franchise superhero film. The number one on the call sheet for us is the first AD. So it's really told from the front lines. We have producer characters, we have actor characters, we have, our department head characters, all that stuff. But really the focus is on the running of the set and what happens on a set. And we all know things are really kind of batshit crazy sometimes on set, and we push ourselves to extremes. So it's finding the humor in that. So it was a real challenge because we have to look like we're shooting a superhero film. So we have to build Marvel level sets with Marvel sized crew, but then shoot it with a television budget crew doing a TV show. So when you see the show, people in front of the camera are a mix of background actors and actual real crew members, because the cameras are all functioning, or the cranes are functioning. And so we had to build two separate crews out. And so in some ways, the crew that you see on camera is bigger than the crew that's behind the camera, because, we couldn't afford to pay all those people. And we have to build these elaborate sets. But the other cool part is that we don't, because sometimes the stuff is green screen or it's set extension. And so we get to show the uglier side of like, oh, well, at the end of the day, this is going to turn into the lair, but it's like two rocks and something on a stick. And they, so we get to show all the sides of it, which is a lot of fun. And, our writers were really great. They took great pains to sit down and talk with hundreds of people in the business, from high levels to crew levels. They talked to our crew. They had me come into the room a couple times to talk, just to share war stories. And they're really trying to make it as real as possible. I will say that for my 20s and early 30s, I would pretty much be classified as a workaholic. I really didn't date. I didn't have a family. And I also didn't have a home a lot of the time. I was, on location here. Like, I spent a lot of my 20s, most of my 20s on the road, and my 30s, because I was production managing, was kind of sat in Los Angeles. So, I didn't really have a work-life balance. I put in all my time really early on and just worked the days, took every job I could get. I was firsting by 26. And then I production managed my first show at 33. So, I was pretty like, just go for it. And then when I turned 35, I met my husband, now husband. And that's when things started to like take one step back and go like, okay, how do we do this? And luckily I was on a show. It was a basic cable series that only shot 11-hour days, which was, we could only afford to. So it was the best thing for dating, because I could actually go home and like have a meal, and, it was that. And then after that, I worked on a show I was working 24 hours a day. And thank God we were married by that point, because the relationship wouldn't have lasted. And he's an executive at a studio. So we both were really still kind of driven, but carved out our time for each other, which was great. And then we had kids, and kids changed everything. I have 12-year-old twins. So 12 years ago plus, we had our lives rocked completely with this. And it really forced me to really think about work-life balance in a way that I never had before, because I didn't want to be away from the kids a lot, and I didn't want to be absent in their lives. And I want to be there for everybody. Now, of course, we have a nanny, like a lot of people do, that helped us out. But what I started doing professionally is, especially because I was in the producer role, I wound up having now I have a line producer who works with me, and we have a production manager and a supervisor. And it's a little different in London because the hours are less. We only shoot 10-hour days in London, but here I have a rule that everybody works only a 12-hour day. And so my production manager will open the show at 7 a.m, be there at 6, troubleshoot, because UPM's great, because if somebody doesn't show up or the equipment's late or whatever, they're there. They'll watch the first rehearsal. I'll come on a day when it's the director's first day, or if it's going to be something like that needs moral support, I'll be there. But usually then I'll come in, I'll take my kids to school, and I'll come in between 8:30 and 9, and that's when we'll have our first sets of prep meeting, because I'm usually the prepping person. I'm in the scout van, or I'm in meetings and stuff like that. And then, my production supervisor or producer will come in a little bit later if we're going late that night, so that then the person who came in at 6 goes home at 6. If I came in at 9, I leave at 9, and then the other person can stay until 1 a.m. And, again, if it's something really serious, I'll stay later or come in earlier, but that's maybe one day every 2 weeks kind of thing. And I really, try to get home by 7 o'clock to see my kids. And with enough people, you can do that. And I encourage my department heads to do that too. The ones who open should not be the ones who close, and keep the shooting crew tight, because that's who that is. And we found real success with that. Even my colleagues who don't have families or don't have kids just like the fact that we let them have a real life. They get time off, and they can sleep and all that, because it's too much. Now, the other side of work-life balance is going on location, which is what I just went through, which I was gone for 7 months from my family. I saw them twice in person in New York. We had to meet for just a fleeting weekend each time. And that was really hard on everybody. I mean, I talked to my kids several times a day, would do homework with them on, Zoom and stuff like that. But, now we're looking at, if the franchise goes back, or with the way work is in Los Angeles, because it's such a dearth of thing, the whole family and I may move to England for 5 or 6 years. So I can be in one place where I can see them. My husband's also a studio executive at Paramount, which we all know what's going on there. He likely will not be working there past, middle of next year. So we're all eyeing a life change, but trying to do it in a way that we can all be together.
Let me ask you a question. I mean, everything we've talked about sort of gets back to, the mentoring and starting as a PA, et cetera. How does one go about building a network of people that you can grow with as your career develops?
Well, when you're a PA, make friends with everybody. Make friends with the fellow PAs, because those are the ones that are going to get you your other jobs. They're going to be the ones that's like, hey, this person's doing this person's doing that. But it's also about, getting to know the other department heads and the other departments, because you never know who's going to recommend you for something. It's not just the ADs, although you should always really form a tribe. You want to be on that traveling group of people who go from show to show. So you give it your all, and, you stay with them as much as you possibly can. But it's also, getting to know, the key grip, the cinematographer, those people, because that can pay off down the line, or, literally the first AC who you're maybe running lunch to, or giving a bottle of water to, or whatever, is eventually going to be a cinematographer one day, and to walk on set, and, you want people to remember you. I mean, one of the nicest things that ever happened to me, on my first show, League, we had a mostly New York crew, and we were shooting in Southern Indiana. And, it was my first show. I ran my tail off, and I was kind of like the mascot, right? The new guy. And that was 91. So in 2008, we moved Ugly Betty to New York, and I was a producer on that. And I walked on stage, and our grip rigging crew was the crew from League. I hadn't seen those guys in that time. And the key grip guy named Eddie Kerwick turned around and looked at me. He was like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm the producer." He turned around to the guys. He goes, "I told you he was going to make it. I told you this was going to happen." And I was like, that's the nicest compliment you can get. And so when I had to go in and, negotiate with the New York Grips, they already knew me. And because they thought I was a nice guy, we actually could have a substantive conversation. So you just never know. You never know. I was on one show as a first AD that was an indie film that was a disaster. And the bond company got called in, and we all know what happens when the bond company gets called. And I had to go in and meet the bond representative to explain why we were, behind schedule. And I'm going like, I'm going to get fired. I know I'm the first AD. This is, and I walked in to meet the guy, and it was my old set PA from New York from like 7 years earlier, who's now with the bond company. He's like, oh, sit down. Let's talk about what's really going on here. I did not get fired. And so, you never know those people that you're working with, like you build that network. I mean, to this day, all of us call each other, like the folks who I brought up and the folks who brought me up. If I have a situation, I mean, I on the franchise, we were working with a pretty high level director, Sam Mendes, and my mentor was working with Ridley Scott in television. And so I got on the phone with him and it's like, so tell me what it's like to have a British legend directing television for the first time. So we swapped stories about that. And, and then sometimes I'll get a call from somebody saying, oh, hey, I heard you shot in New York for a long period of time. I'm about to go there. Can we talk about ins and outs and things like that? So we all still collaborate from the early days on to now, which is really fun,
Do you ever pitch shows to a network? I know you're a hired gun, but do you ever
I do.
On a pitch meeting? Yeah.
Yeah, I've been on pitch meetings. I have some stuff I'm developing that we're pitching, and yeah, it's a whole other world. And nowadays it's a really weird world.
Can you just walk me through kind of a rough sketch of what that might be like?
Sure. Well, prior to the pitch, you've already submitted either a pitch deck and a script. Back in the early days of streaming and COVID, you could sell a show based on a napkin. Nowadays, it's a lot more. So you have to go in with nowadays really IP, a good series deck outline, and a solid pilot script. And I'm just talking television. So feature, it's a little different. You need that talent attached in features more so than a script, which is really interesting. But I'm doing both right now, so I'm kind of seeing both sides of how this goes. And then, so if you're lucky enough to get in the room, the exec calls you, and they've already read the pilot, they've already seen the deck, they know the IP. So you're not really going in to pitch them the project. You're going in to pitch you and why you're the right person to shepherd this project. Or, if you get the sense there may be like, maybe we want to do this, maybe we not, you have to go in with the enthusiasm of why this is good for them. So your agent, I have a great agent who will kind of brief me ahead of time saying, yeah, they're a little on the fence here, but they still want to meet you. So now I know going in, like, we have to go in there and like convince them this is the right thing. Or it's, hey, they really like the project, but you're really gonna have to go sell yourself. Then I know it's more about me. And these things are always so weird because everybody's such a cheerleader on both sides. And all you'll hear is, I love this. This is the most amazing. And you walk out of the room going, they're going to buy this. And then you never hear from them again, because it's all this kind of really, and I'm from the Midwest. So like fake doesn't really fly with me. It just, I have a meter for this stuff. So I also can get a little discouraged because I'm just like, I really don't want to go in there and have to be like, the dog and pony show, but you have to do it. And executives these days it's very interesting all around town because a lot of people got promoted during COVID, but they're not as experienced as they normally would be in getting promoted. So sometimes you're walking an executive through a process as well. So it's really depends on where you are. A place like HBO, these folks are veterans. They've been doing it forever, but it's also a very specific kind of show that they're looking for. If we think of HBO shows, but if you're going to Hulu, and by saying Hulu, I'm saying probably Hulu and ABC or Hulu and Disney Plus, because there's such cross-pollination within the Disney thing, or same thing at NBC with Peacock versus the network versus, one of the cable nets. You have to kind of know who you are and not be so malleable either. Like back in the day, you could be really obsequious and be like, oh, of course we'll make this character a woman and we'll do this and we'll do, it can, sure it says this, but yeah, they don't have to be a football player. They can be playing lacrosse. I don't care. Now you have to stick to your guns because you can get noted to death, just noted to death. And so, my partners and I in this have all kind of adopted the feeling of, we're going to go in there, we're going to sell them the show we want to sell. And if they don't want it, they don't want it. We're not going to change. I have a movie that's based on a British best-selling book. And the first thing somebody said to us was, well, could it be in New York? And we're like, no, it's clearly British. Well, that's really limiting. And literally out of my mouth came, did we call Love Actually or, Four Weddings and a Funeral limiting? I mean, it's a romantic comedy in Britain. Americans love this. Yeah, but it just may be better in New York. No, I think London's pretty romantic. Like, it was just, we didn't sell. But it can be really frustrating, really frustrating.
Do you stay involved in a project all the way through post?
Yes, although I'm not a post producer. I have a post producer who I work with, so they're really doing the day-to-day and handling the deliverables, all that stuff. But I will be involved, watching cuts, giving notes, making sure, I'm also there to help. Like if this actor's agent isn't helping with ADR, I'll make the call to them and be like, hey, we really need your help. I'll go to color grading if I'm in the same city that they're doing it in, because I like that aspect of it. I do look at VFX shots. I am very involved in the VFX process because that begins in production. So with, initial renderings, pre-concepts, being on set to execute it. So I kind of follow that stuff all the way through. Again, global stuff, jack of all trades, like, keep an eye on everything, but I'm not doing the day-to-day detail work.
It must be very rewarding to have that broad a base of knowledge that you can, you basically, maybe you can't step in and do everyone else's job, but how they're supposed to do it.
You have a basic knowledge of it, but you also have enough, I think, for me, whenever I have to ask a question, how do I put this the right way? I don't know everything, but I know how to ask in a way that shows respect to what they're doing. You know what I mean? I know what people go through. I've been outside the makeup trailer at 4 a.m. I have been on stage with construction. I have done all those things. So I don't know how a set goes together necessarily, but I do know to look at and go like, we're not going to be ready on time, and how to phrase that question of, instead of going and accusing somebody like, you're not going to be ready with the set, are you? You have to go in and go like, hey, can you walk me through the timeline of what needs to do? And can we just look at the sets as we go around and take the time and the investment and, the showing up. I make a point to walk, like when we're in builds, I'll walk the stages twice a day, just by myself. I'll go take a walk, go walk through the stages. I'll run into the coordinator, the paint foreman, or the decorator, and just, really, sometimes I don't even ask about the set. It's just, how are you? What's going on? That kind of stuff, just to have that rapport so that later when you have to come down and be like, hey, is there a crisis, or we can't do this, or there's a no, it's not me talking to them for the first time. And I truly love that aspect of it because I like knowing what people do and I like asking the questions. And, now technology evolves so quickly that, like, I love going to camera tests and talking to the first ACs because there's always some new gadget on the camera that I've never seen before. Or in visual effects, there's 1 week it's blue screen, the next week it's green screen, the next week we don't need anything. And, trying to understand the evolution of these things. So, yeah, I really like it. And it's funny because I've had college students especially be like, well, when did you produce your first show? And I said, well, I was 40 and they look at me and they go, why did it take that long? And it's like, because you're literally building these layers. You can't walk in and do what I do out of college. You can't even walk in and do what I do after 5 years of work. It takes time, and also people have to respect you. You have to come in with a bit of a resume and people know that you know what you're doing. So it's all fun. It's all about running a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Do you have any unmet goals at this point that you still want to do stuff? I mean, I know you're pitching your own projects and that sort of thing. Is that where you see yourself going?
No, that's a hobby. That's really a hobby. If something goes great, it's more passion for me because it's stuff in the LGBTQ space, which I feel is underserved. So, I'm not pitching general entertainment. This is stuff that I'd like to see, but, we'll see. For me, now as I'm seeing the far side of 50, and thinking about like how many more years do I want to keep doing this, and what are the things that I want to accomplish. My first goal is just to work with nice people. I don't mind extreme conditions. We all deal with that, but I would like to work with good collaborators. I won't sit here and go like my dream is to work with someone. I've been pretty fortunate that I've been working with those someones like Mike Judge, Issa Rae, Sam Mendes, Armando Iannucci without even trying. I never said like this is what I wanted to do. And so I know that good stuff will come my way and some crappy stuff will come my way, which is kind of fine. But, if I had my druthers in terms of experiential stuff, I would like to do something in science fiction, which I have not really done. I've done procedurals, I've done medical, I've done legal, I've done comedy, I've done soapy drama, but I really haven't done science fiction, which I would like to really dip my hand into, and have that experience at least. So that's kind of the next frontier.
I have a couple from my
Sure,
students.
go ahead. Yeah.
And, that I just I'm looking at my list here. And well, one of the questions had to do with your current show, which is franchise, at least to them. And they were just wondering about, this was the directors play a crucial role in shaping a show's style. A scene with Sam Mendes directing the first episode of franchise. What's your process for identifying and attracting directors who align with the project's creative vision, and how do you typically collaborate with them once they're on board? So they're interested in that, and they're also interested in like, how does a director find you? Is it like, how does that happen? How do they get?
Well, let's start with that one. So most studios will have kind of their initial list of go-tos. They'll have the people in, like who do dramas, who do comedies, who do, different things. And when you're building a series, they will give you their list and say, like, these are the folks that we like. They don't make you hire, but you're going to want to hire a few people off there because they like them. And hopefully, some of these people. And then, experientially, you have the directors that you've worked with over time. Like I don't even know how many directors I've worked with in my life, from past shows, and do they fit right and that kind of thing. So taking the franchise as an example, Sam did the pilot. And then we were trying to put together 3 other directors two of them doing 2 blocks of 2 each, and then one doing a block of 3. And we went with somebody to follow Sam, who I had worked with on Silicon Valley, who knew comedy, who had also done Physical, the Rose Byrne show on Apple, but also did like The Diplomat and Last of Us, so had a really broad range. Kind of like Sam, cinematic in scope, but also able to do, smaller television. So that director, Liza Johnson, came in right after Sam and did episodes 2 and 3. Then we knew we wanted a British director, which we had a few come our way through Neil Street, which is Sam's company, and also Armando from his days, and our showrunner with people that he'd wanted to work with. And we found one guy who we thought got the premise to the show. But not only that, but would maybe help us bring the premise and the visual style into its final direction. That's a really like bridge position. And then for the last 3 episodes, we went with a director named Kevin Bray, who I had worked with on Insecure for multiple seasons, and my showrunner had worked with on Succession. So now you've got somebody who's doing Succession style work, Insecure, which is a very niche, and he also just had finished Penguin. So he was doing something big and franchisey. So he understood all those things. So in curating that, we now had our group. And then as if you watch the show from Sam's visual style in episode 1 and go all the way through to 8, you'll notice that the visual style really changed over that course of time. And that was because, and that's typical with pilots. Pilots are usually shot by feature directors. They're very cinematic. You're trying to sell this thing, and no other episode is going to have the same budget as the pilot, ever. So now you have to find somebody who can evolve that look into a viable television series and still maintain all the creative superiority and integrity of the pilot, but let it be, something that we can do on a week-to-week basis. And so it took us from Liza through Tom into Kevin, and then by Kevin, we were like, okay, we've tried all these different little things, and we know what Sam did. This is where we want to be, and we fine tune. And that's what happens in series. If you know, and this is an interesting exercise for students now that we have everything available. But if you pick a couple comedies like a 30 Rock or Parks and Recreation, watch the first season, or just watch the pilot and the last episode of the first season, and you will see how much shows change in a very stark way. I did a lot of research before we did the franchise. I watched 4 different comedies first season from beginning to end, from pilot to the 22nd episode or whatever. And, you know, all the time I'd be like, guys, it starts one way and it always finishes another. It's okay. We can change. You know, we can't, if you stick rigidly to something, it's not good for creativity. You find things as you go along. Actors find characters, writers find words, directors find images and way of producing things or presenting things. So we really encourage that. And, you know, reputationally, again, you know, we'll have agents pitching us at directors. We will have the studio. Sometimes it's other people we work for. We just all kind of sit around and collaborate together, make a list, and then we go to the studio and say, this is how we want to lay it out. These are the people that we want to do this. And then they approve it. Again, it's their money. They get to approve who is the custodian there. So, you know, you have to give them some people that they like. But it's a whole process.
Well, what's fascinating, I mean, I'm fascinated and I'm in the industry. The kids are going to be blown away when they hear what you just said, because the idea that you, as executive producer, are curating these directors in that way is it's incredible to me. And the idea that, you know, just what you spelled out it's really interesting, because I don't think a student realizes this. I mean, I'm right now, because I love the franchise. I'm not just saying that because you're on. And I watched them all, and I could see it changing. As an art director, I was like, oh, you know, you could see it. You could see each director's hand there, and just the nuances as it evolved. And so that's interesting. So when you get a project, and when you have this, that's part of your duties then, is to be on top of what directors are doing in the world, in the entertainment world, who you've already had your connections with, that you've actually worked with, but you're always connecting, talking, and looking at other people's work, thinking maybe I could, you know, you keep them in the back of your head. Maybe that person would be good for this project.
Right. Well, and even, I mean, the curation goes down even more granularly. I mean, I just kind of scope that, but let's say, and I'll use a 22 episode, or nowadays 18 to 20 episode network series, right, as an example. So you know that you've got your pilot, that's shot. Hopefully you get the pilot director back for episode 2. But if you don't, you need somebody who can give you a compelling episode 2, because episode 2 is the most crucial thing, because if the audience love the pilot, they're going to come back for 2. If you don't win them again in 2, they're never going to stay for 3 and beyond. So then you've got to make sure that you get ringers for like your first 4 episodes after the pilot. And then there's going to be, you know, they're going to want you to try a new director, or they're going to want to try somebody who was in like the studio's director training program, or, you know, or the DP says, I want to try to direct. So then you start to figure out, like, okay, if we're going to put in a new person here, we need ringers on either side of them. You know, if this episode is going to be super expensive, I need a director who knows action, or, you know, if we're blowing up something, I need this person here. And then I've got to save money on the episodes on either side. So I need the folks who can do really cheap and really fast, and who can, because directors have different reputation. So it's not only just the creative, like, flow of the show, but then you have to realize, like, how you're protecting each director and using their strengths and weaknesses to your advantage. And, you know, I mean, I've had jokes with directors where they're like, yeah, you brought me in because the guy before me just spent all the money. Yep, they did. So you're getting the script where they're all in rooms talking to each other. He's like, okay, great, fine. You know, and they know who they are, you know. So it's a fun game of chess. I always love doing that.
No, absolutely fascinating to me. I mean, the thought that all the nuances of each director you're paying attention to. So do the agents then of those directors, because this is a world.
You always call a fellow producer who's worked with them and say, okay, can you tell me what it's like? And then me personally, I will also always call the first AD with a director and say, okay, now tell me what it was like. Because then I like to compare the producer's version to the AD's version, because you'll get the AD's version is a lot more in line with, that's going to tell you more about mood. That's going to tell you more about skill. It's going to tell you more about on set. How are they with making decisions rapidly, all that kind of stuff, versus where the producer is going to tell you more about the creative and the aesthetic and all those kind of things. I want to balance both out, because having been at a director's side for 14 hours a day, I don't want to work with jerks. I don't want people who yell at the crew. I don't want people who aren't good with actors or just defer all their shot making to the DP and don't care about angles and don't care about this stuff. So you got to kind of balance out the two sides of being a director.
So because we should wind this up, because I don't want to take any more time. You've had such an incredible career and you're still producing amazing projects. If your son or daughter said, Dad, I want to be in your world, what do you think? What would you tell them? What would be your words of encouragement?
I'd say, okay, but you've got to start here. And, I'm not going to help you at all. I will be here for advice. I'll be here for all those things, but I'm not going to get you the job. You're going to have to go out there. And unfortunately, my last name is an amalgamation of my husband's last name and my last name before we got married. So we were individually Klever and Weiss, and we put it together. And so there's no other Kleverweises in the entire world. Like, we are the only 4 people in our family who are this. And so if they wanted to go into this business, the name would be a dead giveaway of who you are. And I would actually, one piece of advice I would do is I would say, why don't you use a different last name for a while? Get your first job and work as a PA with a different last name. Because I want you to be treated like everybody else. I don't want you treated like, oh, I worked with your dad on this, or I worked, I've seen that, and then people aren't always giving you the truthful shot. And so, I would tell them, but I have no fear of them doing this. My daughter right now says she wants to be a director. So, and my son has taken YouTube classes, like YouTube production classes. Like, they're interested in it. I don't know that they'll really want to do it, but I wouldn't fear it. I'd be more fearful if they said, I want to be an actor. That I'm like, well, okay, we'll have a different conversation about that, just because, harder, or a writer too. When you get into like purely creative plays, it's a lot harder. This, I don't know. I wouldn't mind it if they did, but on the other hand, I just want them to be happy. And that's the end of the day. I love what I do. This was the thing that I found that college really didn't figure me out. I didn't figure it out in college. I didn't figure it out in graduate school. I figured it out when I walked on a set, and that was where I knew I belonged. And then life started just laying itself out in front of me. I just want them to find that thing that makes them feel about themselves that this industry gives it to me. If it's the industry, great. But if it's not, I just want them to find something that they're passionate about that makes them, even in the darkest days, still want to go back for more.